Morning brought a sense of unease as the dim dawn light broke through a sky thick with heavy clouds. Memories of our shared past rose like ghosts, filled with moments of joy, regret, and decisions that changed everything I once knew. The moment had come, one that no amount of preparation could ease. Thinking back was bittersweet, blending youthful dreams with the hard-earned lessons. Our path here was rough, like broken glass, reflecting love, mistakes, and silent forgiveness. Yet, despite it all, we stood together, where silence spoke louder than words. A light rain fell as we stood by her grave, each lost in personal memories. Some wept, hands trembling in quiet grief. Others came to support those most affected. I wasn't there out of duty, but to mark the end of a chapter we all shared. I also needed closure, to see her there in the casket, to watch it close, so I could finally move on. My presence was for my children, too. Oddly, out of everyone, we were the least tearful. We probably understood Heidi better than anyone else. As I glanced at the crowd around the grave, a few faces met mine, offering nods or smiles. I returned them, sensing their condolences. Some, mostly men, but a few women too, avoided my eyes, focusing elsewhere. I wished I could show them my resentment had died with Heidi. At that moment, a small, sun-tanned hand slipped into mine. Standing in front of everyone, I knelt beside the woman holding my hand, resting my head against her nearly 8 months pregnant belly. My daughter smiled, and a wave of surprised joy swept through the gathering. The gesture resonated, reminding everyone of life's cycle, death and birth, opposites yet intertwined. I smiled inwardly for a different reason. Heidi would have hated it. For once, the spotlight wasn't on her. This was supposed to be her final act, but now everyone's attention was on my child. "I'm a grown man," I whispered. This would be my 4th child. I already had 3 grown children with Heidi. David stood next to me, with Sarah beside him, and Sasha further to the right. At nearly 60, I'd learned that holding on to anger is corrosive. By the time Heidi passed, any hatred I had was long gone. Looking at our children, I knew I couldn't truly hate her. They were proof of that. Without her, they wouldn't exist as they do. I let go of any resentment years ago. Holding on to anger serves no one, and Heidi no longer had any place in my life. I still wouldn't mind seeing her be Cerberus snack, I thought with a grin, but I didn't linger on it. The last time I saw Heidi alive was 5 months ago at our son David's Thanksgiving gathering. I recalled that day as the minister began to speak. It was a warm November evening in Florida, almost summer-like. A lone figure walked along the beach, shoulders tense, heading toward 2 beach chairs, the only mark on the otherwise untouched sand. The chairs were side by side, just inches apart, but facing opposite directions. In one, a gray-haired man watched the waves, occasionally standing to toss stones into the sea, glancing back at the car in the driveway of the nearby house. A woman sat in the other chair, half my age at 29. Our birthdays were just a day apart. My eyes, once blue, had turned gray over time, and my intense gaze contrasted with her calm brown eyes. Her tanned skin hinted more at her Mexican heritage than the sun, and her long brown hair was tied in a ponytail. She radiated calm while I was restless. Neither of us noticed the angry figure approaching in the sand. "James, we should rest," she said in perfect English. "We are resting," I replied. "We're not doing anything strenuous. You keep pacing and throwing things into the water. Watching you makes me tired." I sat back down, understanding why she positioned the chairs to face each other, close enough to maintain eye contact or share a kiss. Focused on me and her iPad, she didn't see him until he was upon us. He was just under 6 feet, well-built, and 20 years younger than me. I was calculating his exact age when his fist came at me. It felt ridiculous, a young man attacking someone almost retired. I caught his fist and swept his legs, pinning him down. His anger met my experience, balancing the struggle until a metallic click ended it. "If you move, I'll shoot," Samantha said, pressing a tool to his head. My son David froze, shock and fear in his eyes. Samantha cursed fluently in Spanish, making me laugh. "Sam, don't shoot him," I said. "A funeral would be an ordeal, and Michigan's too cold for a trip now." She looked at me, still irritated. "Dave, have you noticed how her accent thickens when she's angry? She'll be speaking Aztec soon." "Is this David? Your son?" she asked, eyes wide. I nodded, smiling. "And you were going to shoot him?" "I still could," she muttered, lowering the Colt. "David," I asked calmly, "why travel 1,200 miles just to confront me? And how'd you find me?" Top investigator. She's a family friend of Uncle Chance's girlfriend," David said. "Sarah Price from the Rios agency?" I finished. Samantha groaned. moved her chair next to mine, and sat with clear frustration, resuming her reading, or pretending to. "Dad?" David hesitated. "Why's she so upset? Rios is her uncle. Sarah's one of her best friends. They didn't know you were looking for me. I rarely use my full name here, so Sarah probably didn't connect the dots. So, why are you here?" "It's rough at home," he said. "Mom's not well mentally or physically. She's been diagnosed with some mysterious illness, but we don't know if she's hiding it from us or if doctors really can't figure it out." I shrugged, feigning ignorance. Samantha and David both watched me closely. "I'm not a doctor," I said. "I have a small business here, successful enough to delay full retirement. Life here is pricier than Michigan, so I need to work to ensure my wife and child will be secure when I'm gone." "You're not leaving," Sam said quietly. "I meant when I die," I replied. "And I meant what I said," she laughed. "Even God knows you're mine until I let go." David looked at us confused. "I don't know what I can do or how this involves me," I said. "What about everything you taught us growing up?" David snapped. "About responsibility and doing the right thing? I came here to ask you to come home, to help Mom. You left without warning when she was hurt, without a reason, leaving her without support." Samantha muttered curses in Spanish, making me chuckle. "You really don't know?" I said. "Know what?" David's voice grew sharper. "You abandoned your family for a younger woman and pretended to be married here in Miami, while Mom suffered and we struggled to support her." "What a liar," I muttered. "What a liar," Sam echoed. David stood up, angry. "Don't insult my mother," he said as Sam raised her magnum again. "Enough," I said. "Sam, put the magnum away. David, let's talk inside. You'll understand." "You agree your mom is lying?" Sam added. "And if I don't?" David asked. "I'll go back to Michigan with you," I replied. We moved to the terrace, and Sam brought us beer. "Who told you I left Mom without money?" I asked. "She did," David said. "She's been living with us ever since, and we've had to—" I burst out laughing. David's eyes blazed with anger. "Why so serious?" I said. "You know you're just like me." Leaving him on the terrace, I fetched a stack of papers and handed them to him. "What is this?" he asked. "The file for the sale of our house," I said. "I made sure she received over $400,000 when I left. Here's proof of the check. If she didn't have money, what did she do with it?" "She never told us," he said, stunned. "Exactly," I replied. "Your mom always needs someone to support her. With me gone, you stepped in. If you knew she had nearly $500,000, you'd expect her to rent her own place. She needed to seem broke." "How did you get these?" David asked. "I gave her the house in the divorce," I said. "Are you divorced?" he asked. "Yes. I couldn't marry Sam otherwise." "But Mom said—" "I filed for divorce, but she refused to sign, attend meetings, or show up in court. Eventually, a warrant was issued, but no one wanted to arrest her. Now I know she was hiding at your place. I moved here because this state allows default divorces. After enough time, the divorce is finalized even if one party refuses. I could have kept everything, but still gave her the house." David's frustration returned. "She never told us. She always needs to be the center of attention. Check the rest of the file." "What are these envelopes?" he asked. "When I left, you were working in Alaska, unreachable, and your sisters were in college. I sent the divorce info and checks for each of you. What happened to them?" "They disappeared, while everything else remained." "How much were they for?" he asked. $10,000 each, I replied. David stormed off the deck, kicking the tree in frustration. "I thought you three just sided with your mom during the divorce," I said. "I figured I was left out. None of you ever reached out, not on my birthday, Christmas, or Father's Day. I assumed you didn't want to hear from me." "You seem to have settled in well," David said, glancing around. "And she's beautiful. Are you really married?" "Yes," I said. "She's everything I once hoped your mom would be." "But Dad, how old is she?" he pressed. "She just turned 29. She's kind and protective, and she's pregnant." "A boy? So I'll finally get the little brother I wanted, but at 38, he laughed. "And my stepmom's younger than Sarah and Sasha." "Wow," he muttered. "Sorry, ma'am, but this feels like living in the Matrix. I almost regret coming. Every word you say exposes another lie Mom told. She had us believing you ran off with your secretary. We even confronted Carol Brady, your former secretary, demanding answers. My name's Samantha, or Sam," she corrected him. "Dad, how do I explain this to Sarah and Sasha? They wanted me to bring you back to face Mom and support her," he said. "Don't tell them yet," I said. "But why? They deserve the truth." "They do, and that's why I'll come for Thanksgiving. We'll clear it all up. Keep the gathering small, just us." "6 with Kelly," Sam added. "And I can't leave my wife out." "Justin makes 8, David said. "Why Justin?" I asked, uncharacteristically sharp. David looked surprised. He was dating Sarah when you left. They're married now. He's not my favorite, but she loves him. I nodded. Fine. Make sure he's there too. 3 days later, I arrived at David's, already irritated. It was cold and windy in Michigan, not ideal for Sam, who was used to Florida's warmth. I'd bought her a new fur coat, which I knew would draw laughs. It was 45 degrees, and she looked ready for the Arctic. My frustration wasn't from the weather, I expected that. It was the car. I'd planned to rent a Hertz Mustang GTH, famous for its high performance and history dating back to the 60s when Ford built them for racing enthusiasts. But at Detroit Metro, all they had was a V6 convertible. It was a bad sign for the trip. As Sam shivered, I put my arm around her and headed for the door. Before we reached the porch, the door flew open, and Sarah launched herself at me. Nearly 60 but fit, I managed to stay upright as she hugged me fiercely. I carried her inside without her feet touching the ground. Sam watched, smiling. Sasha, more cynical, spoke up. Nice, Sarah. Way to show him how much you're holding a grudge, she said sarcastically. I smiled. Sarah turned, glared at Sasha, and flipped her off. Forget you, Dad's home. David walked in with Kelly, who immediately noticed Sam's long fur coat and nudged David, pointing at it. Don't start, David said sharply. Those coats are expensive, and the more animals used, the higher the cost. What do you mean, honey? Kelly asked, resting her hand on her thigh. For Sam's coat, they probably used 20 or 30 minks. That's about $4,000 or $5,000. For you, we'd need a mortgage, and minks would go extinct. Sam's sharp breath showed her shock at David's remark. We're about the same size, Sam said quickly. You could probably fit in this one. I like her. Kelly smiled. Honey, I couldn't even get an arm in that coat. I know I'm bigger, but Dave wouldn't have it any other way. Everyone turned their attention to Sam. David pretended to search her for tools, then hugged her, leading us into the living room. My daughters eyed Sam curiously. It wasn't surprising to see them together, but Heidi sitting on the couch with her feet up while Justin pretended to watch a football game felt surreal. Kelly announced she needed to check the turkey and headed to the kitchen, with Sam following her. Stay and settle in, honey, Kelly said. I thought one of the others would help. I'll come by later, Sam replied, her accent more noticeable with nerves, drawing attention from everyone except David and me. Even Heidi glanced at Sam while Justin's eyes followed her every move. Heidi's expression shifted to fear as she looked at me. I smiled and shook my head. Hi, Jim, Heidi said. Can I get a hug? It's a holiday. Even David hugged his friend. She's not his friend, I said bluntly. And I heard you were sick. If I hugged you the way I wanted, you'd stop breathing. You used to hug me like that, she said. It made me feel loved and safe. Yes, but now I'd grab your throat, I replied. I hoped we could move past this, Heidi said, sounding fragile and act as always. Dad, if Sam isn't David's friend, who is she? Sarah asked. Justin perked up, waiting for the answer. Before I could reply, Kelly came back with a tray of drinks. She handed me a Dos Equis Amber, gave Justin a bottle, and served Sarah and Heidi white wine, while Sasha got tea. David received a bottle of homebrew, and as Kelly turned, he playfully tried to smack her. She dodged, grinning. No chance. Why don't I get to choose my drink? Justin complained. You can, Kelly replied sweetly, once you get a job and pay for something. Turning to Sam, Kelly asked, What would you like, wine or beer? I can't drink alcohol, Sam said quietly. Worried it's unfeminine? Kelly teased. No, just pregnant, Sam said, smiling. All eyes shifted to Sam. Justin's jaw dropped, while Sarah and Sasha's expressions softened. Women seemed to be more accepting when pregnancy was involved, and suddenly, my daughters were Sam's fans. Congratulations, Sasha said. Are you in touch with the father? Yes, very much, Sam smiled. I love him dearly. Both daughters reacted warmly, even Sasha. Heidi pursed her lips tighter. So, Sam, Sarah continued, are you Dave's colleague or something? David looked unsure, so I stepped in. Sarah, Sam has the same relationship with David as she does with you and Sasha. What does that mean? Justin blurted, realizing too late he shouldn't have spoken. She's his stepmother, I said, taking her coat and sitting beside her. The room fell silent, jaws dropping. But Dad, you can't be married to her. You're still married to Mom, Sarah said. So, Heidi, you haven't told them we're divorced? I asked, as all eyes turned to Heidi, who glared at me. It didn't feel like the right time, Heidi said with a sly smile. I didn't want to upset them with news that might break the family apart. Is that why you didn't tell them you took their money? I asked. What does he mean? Sasha demanded. I wanted to hold on to it until they were responsible enough to handle it, Heidi stammered. Anyone under 30, raise your hand, I said. Only Sam raised hers. Oh, James, how young is she? I can't believe you got someone younger than your daughter's pregnant, Heidi said. Forget that, Sasha interrupted. Let's talk about the money and the divorce. Heidi coughed. I think I need medicine, she said, trying to get up. It looks like you're trying to leave, I mocked. She sat back down, crossing her arms. Fine, she snapped. Your father left without a word while I was in the hospital. Later, I got divorce papers but refused to sign. I thought he'd return if he didn't hear from you, so I hid the letters and checks he sent. That might sound believable, except for one thing, I said. The checks were cashed and deposited in your account. You stole from them. I'm sorry, Heidi said. I was alone and thought I might need it for emergencies. If they didn't know about the money, they wouldn't miss it. How much were the checks? Sarah asked. $10,000 each, Heidi admitted. $10,000, Sasha shouted, glaring at her mother. Kelly came in, drawn by the noise. He left me with nothing, Heidi said, trying to calm Sasha. I shook my head, laughing. What's funny, Dad? Sasha asked. Your mom's lying again, I said. Maybe she forgot. Forgot what? Sasha pressed. The house sale, I said. Back to the money, Dad, Sasha said. That could have helped me go back to school and get my MBA. I thought you abandoned us, but now I find out Mom deceived us. I'm sorry, I said. I loved your mother deeply. Even when I left, I made sure she wasn't without funds. I arranged the house sale and gave her everything. Dad, we know, Sarah said. Mom told us the house was damaged, and after taxes and fees, she got less than $5,000, most of which went to medical bills. I said, she was placed in a care facility after treatment, fully paid for. She got more than she said. Can we talk about this after dinner? Kelly asked. You'll want to hear this, David said. Mom, how much did you get for the house? A little over $400,000, Heidi said softly. But I was going to... How much? Kelly asked, anger rising. Why are you even living with us? We didn't have a baby because you took over our guest room. We don't charge you rent, you don't help, and we serve you while you sit on that money. Kelly stood over Heidi, with Sasha and Sarah beside her. Let's save this for after dinner, I said, smiling. Minutes later, we sat down at the table, snow falling outside. I realized we'd need to leave earlier than planned for the airport. Driving the Mustang in snow would be an adventure. Even though the rental was a V6, it still packed over 300 horsepower. When we entered the dining room, only a few of us were calm. Justin kept talking about being hungry, and Sam and I missed our usual affection. I pulled her in for a kiss as we walked to the table. Dad, you'll sit at the head, Kelly said. I took my seat, but a problem arose when both Sam and Heidi tried to sit to my left. Mom, sit on the other side, Kelly suggested, trying to avoid conflict. You'll still be close to Dad. I always sit on the left. It's the hard side, Heidi insisted. Sam, calm, noted Heidi's sudden energy, despite acting weak moments earlier. Heidi coughed dramatically, leaning on the table as she found her seat. Help me sit, darling? Heidi asked. Sam frowned at her choice of words. Here's your place, I said, pointing to her chair. Really, Mom? Sasha sighed. We're not that gullible. David mimed handing something to Heidi, making everyone pause. He laughed, and we all took our seats. Sam sat on my left, holding my hand, with Sarah beside her and Sasha next to Sarah. Heidi sat to my right, with Justin across from Sarah. David sat at the other end with Kelly on his left. Everything okay, Dad? Kelly asked as I looked around. Later, I said, noting each man sitting with their partner on the left, except Sarah. Everyone stand, I said. Heidi struggled up as Sasha rolled her eyes. I said grace, thanking God for bringing us together, David for hosting, Kelly for preparing the meal, and my daughters for welcoming me back. I hinted at wanting Sasha to give me a grandson, making Sarah laugh. Finally, I thanked Sam for filling my life with love. What about Justin, Dad? Sarah asked. We're married now. I rolled my eyes, and Justin's face fell. What about me, honey? Heidi chimed in. Kelly lowered her head, sensing what was coming. Heidi, I'm grateful I left Michigan and found a better life, I said. Heidi, unfazed, responded, We had great times and our children can attest to that. Before she could continue, Sam stood, walked around the table, and punched Heidi in the mouth, knocking her to the floor. Justin rushed to pull Sam back, but overstepped, holding her too tightly. I reacted instinctively, hitting him in the face with a bowl of mashed potatoes. He coughed and spat out the food as Sarah threw the gravy boat at him. Get some sauce for your potatoes, she shouted, hitting him squarely. Sasha added, Can't forget cranberry sauce, dumping a bowl over Justin's head. Stop! Stop! Kelly yelled. Justin, wiping his eyes, reached for the turkey. David, quicker, grabbed it to keep it safe, but slipped on the mess, sending the turkey flying into Justin's face. Sam was so furious at Heidi that she didn't notice Justin on the floor. Heidi seized the moment for payback, but Kelly's scream stopped her just in time. Heidi, surprisingly agile, lunged forward, but I intercepted her, knocking her down before she could kick Sam. "Enough!" David shouted. "Dad, this has gone too far." "No, it hasn't," Kelly said. "Your mother was about to kick a pregnant woman." David's face fell as he looked at me. I nodded. "If Kelly hadn't screamed and that kick landed, I would have strangled your mother and gone to jail without regret." "You're insane, James," Heidi shrieked. "I'm your wife, the mother of your children, and you're defending some girl you barely know." I pulled Sam into my lap. "What's behind all this hatred?" David demanded. "Everyone to the living room. I need the full story." "No cleanup," Kelly said firmly as David insisted. "We need answers now." "Mom, be quiet," Sarah said when Heidi began to speak. "We've heard your version. I want the truth." "I need to go," Justin said. "Sarah will catch me up later." "Sit down, Justin," I said, and David added, "You don't even have a job. Stay and listen." We moved to the living room. David lit the fire, and everyone settled in. "I fell in love with your mom at first sight," I began. "It was 1973 at Central Michigan University. I was 19. I saw her walking across campus, short blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and I was so distracted I walked into a lamppost." "You hit a pole for her?" Sam teased. "I'm going to be sick." She didn't notice me then. 3 days later, we officially met, but not before she stepped on my hand when I was picking up papers. "So, did she apologize?" Sasha asked. "No, she didn't. When we met, she demanded I write a paper for her. I agreed, but only if she went on a date with me." "Wait," Sam interrupted. "What's an androgynous look?" "It's a style that's not distinctly masculine or feminine. Back then, women were thin with few curves. It was popular." "Men prefer women who look like women," Sam said, smirking. "You noticed my figure first." "Can I finish?" I asked, and she nodded. "When I finally spoke to your mother, she wasn't apologetic. She told me guys often got distracted because of her, then demanded help with her paper." "That's how we began," I said, remembering how quickly my fantasy of her had faded back then. She burst out laughing like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. I felt embarrassed and angry and started to leave. She limped after me, struggling to keep up in her shoes. "All right, it's an emergency," she said. "We'll go on one date for work that has to be at least a B." "Deal," I replied. "When do you need it?" "Tomorrow," she said. 25 pages, single-spaced. Any topic, 5 footnotes, 3 citations. She gave me her dorm number. Back then, cell phones didn't exist. Pressed for time, I handed her my coursework, which wasn't due for a week. The next morning I called, and she told me where to bring it. When I delivered it, she simply said, "Thanks," and walked away. "Hey, what about our date?" I called after her. She came back, smiled, and set my papers on a table before stepping onto the porch with me. There were no word processors or printers then. I'd typed everything on a typewriter. "Listen," she said, "did you really think I was serious? My evenings are booked for 3 months, but dating's about making a girl notice you, right?" "Probably," I answered. She continued, "I date a lot of guys, hardly remember them, but I noticed you. That counts for something. Next time I see you, I'll even nod. That nod could get other girls to date you." She returned inside with the papers. I fell silent as my kids stared at me and Heidi. "What a jerk," David said. "Dad, you were such a pushover," Sarah added. "Back then, everyone thought Heidi would become a famous model," I said. Modeling was just starting to boom, though the pay was far less than now. A couple of months later, Heidi approached me again on campus. "Hi, James," she said. "Tonight's your evening." "What are you talking about?" I asked. She replied, "You're taking me out." Since last seeing her, I'd learned a lot through word of mouth, as there was no internet. Heidi was known for taking advantage of people, and friends advised me to move on. I had plans for that night, a Kiss concert at Olympia Stadium, with a ticket promised to my best friend. But Heidi's intense look made me change my mind. She got the ticket. "When do we meet?" she asked. 6. Concert starts at 7:30. They're opening for the Rockets," I said. "What concert, Jimbo?" she questioned. "Kiss," I replied, excited. She laughed. "Are you serious? Why would we watch people in more makeup than me shouting like monsters? That's not music, just noise. We should get to know each other as adults. I'll come by your dorm at 10. Don't forget the wine." I faced a dilemma. My favorite band or an unpredictable evening with Heidi. It felt like my moment to choose between paths. I picked the unknown. That night, I met Heidi at 10. She was punctual, oddly so. I was anxious. It was my first time drinking. A cheap, terrible wine that made me feel sick. Yet she stayed, changing my view of her. "Why did you stay?" I asked. "I'm your girlfriend now," she said. She unbuttoned her blouse, guiding my hand to her chest. Even though she didn't have much, kissing her brought more joy than touching her did. But I still did it because she liked it. We were intimate, and I felt over the moon, like I was truly alive for the first time. I felt confident, like I had discovered life's greatest secrets. It was like that moment when Neo rescues Morpheus and starts believing he is the one. How foolish I was. Afterward, she gave me a kiss and quietly left my dorm. The next day started with me feeling on top of the world, but ended with me on edge, desperate for answers. Early that morning, Heidi called me, sobbing. "You're such a jerk," she yelled. "I trusted you," she said. "I'm your girlfriend." Then she hung up. I had no clue what was happening. Like always, I tried to think it through and assumed Heidi was upset because our friends found out about us, but I hadn't told anyone. I called to apologize even though I felt no guilt, but she hung up as soon as she heard my voice. I should have realized something was off, but I was too naive. Minutes later, she called back, crying. "I'm sorry, Heidi," I pleaded. "I swear I didn't tell anyone. People must have heard you. I'm not ashamed." "We did it." "You fool," she said. "I'm your girlfriend. We had to do it." "Then what's wrong?" I asked. "You got me pregnant," she said, bursting into tears. My world collapsed at that moment. My dreams of becoming an engineer and designing advanced car engines faded. Stunned, I sat there silently, holding the phone. It was the 70s, and despite some changes from the 60s, an unmarried pregnancy was still significant news. "What do we do?" I asked. "There are only two options, idiot," she said. "We either get married or you find money for a pregnancy termination. My mom will take us to see the doctor and find out the cost." "All right," I replied. "Which option do you prefer?" "I'd rather have a pregnancy termination," she said. "I want to be a model and can't risk ruining my body. I love you, James, but I'm not ready for marriage." "When are we going?" I asked, not sensing the trap. "We'll pick you up in 15 minutes, she said. Meeting Heidi's mom made me realize just how different Heidi was from her parents. Her father would probably have demanded a paternity test if they'd existed then. Her mom was kind, chubby, and warm, though she didn't seem to like me at first. At the doctor's office, we waited together while Heidi's mom gave me sharp looks. I brought her coffee, handed her magazines, and politely answered her questions about my future and commitment to Heidi. Heidi repeatedly said, "I want a pregnancy termination, and you're paying for it." But her mother smiled at me and said, "If Heidi has to marry, I'd prefer it be you over those other guys she's dated. Maybe you could even calm her down." At the doctor's office, Heidi introduced me as her brother-in-law. We even talked about how she could support us until I graduated. She wanted me to succeed as an engineer to take care of Heidi and her future grandchild. The doctor entered with a stack of papers. "How many days late is your period, Heidi?" he asked. 3 weeks, she replied quietly. I took a home test and it came back positive, so I knew I was pregnant. Heidi's mom suddenly stood up and hit her. The doctor looked shocked, and I sat there, stunned and confused about her anger. Heidi's mom told me to leave, so I did. Inside, I could still hear yelling. When they came out, Heidi apologized, and the doctor's staff, having heard what happened, looked at me with a mix of smiles and pity. On the way home, I asked Heidi's mom, "What was all that yelling about? I'm still confused." Heidi and I sat in the back. I held her hand as her mom, cigarette in hand, turned to look at us. We drove down the highway without seatbelts or airbags, and she barely looked at the road, jerking the wheel only when necessary. "Jimmy, my daughter tried to trick you," her mother said. "She thought she was pregnant after taking a home test 3 weeks ago. But those tests aren't always accurate. Even if she was pregnant, it wouldn't be yours. Last night was your first time together, right?" I nodded. "You can't get pregnant overnight, honey," she continued. "Heidi was trying to pass off someone else's baby as yours, hoping you'd pay for the pregnancy termination or marry her and take care of the baby while she continued her carefree life." Tears welled up as I frowned. I still held Heidi's hand when her mom asked, "Why are you crying?" "I love her," I said. "I wanted to marry her." She stopped the car, and the three of us cried together. Each of us cried for different reasons, but it felt good to release it all. "You're the nicest young man I've ever met," Heidi's mom said as she drove on. In the following weeks, I threw myself into school and activities. Rumors about me and Heidi spread, and plenty of girls approached me. Although they were interested, I couldn't move on. We don't choose who we fall in love with, and despite attention from attractive, kind women, I still carried feelings for Heidi. I never saw Heidi again. If we crossed paths on campus, she'd avoid eye contact and walk away quickly if I approached. I was heartbroken. My dorm mates who thrived on campus gossip shared everything they knew about her, often delighting in the negative stories. But 2 months after that day at the doctor's office, I was almost over it. I finally agreed to a date with a cute girl from one of my classes. She wore glasses and had a great personality, along with a curvy figure. We went to the movies and walked back to her dorm, holding hands. She smiled at me, placed her hands on my shoulders, and tilted her head back. A clear sign in those days that she wanted me to kiss her. I chewed gum all day to keep my breath fresh. I leaned in, sneaking a glance to make sure the kiss would be perfect so she'd want more. Her lips were soft and full, and I already had my arms around her waist. But fate intervened, and the kiss never happened. Just before our lips met, I heard an unmistakable screech. "What are you doing?" Heidi shouted. "Why is my boyfriend kissing a fat girl in the middle of the street? Is this some experiment? Some charity? James, isn't it enough that you donate money to starving children in Africa? Do you need to kiss fat girls too? You can't save everyone." "What do you want, Heidi?" I asked. "You're an idiot," she said sharply. "I'm your girlfriend. Don't pretend you don't know how this works." "Heidi, I haven't heard from you in 8 weeks, I said. "When I saw you on campus, you ran away." "It was hormones, James," she said, "and it's your fault." "You're insane," I replied. "Yes, so what?" She smiled. "It's not your fault, but it is about hormones. I'm 8 weeks pregnant, and this time it's real. I've seen a doctor. So guess who the father is?" "I don't know," I said. "Could be anyone." "No, James, you're the father," she squealed. Tired of being manipulated, I asked for a blood test and wanted to speak with the doctor, Heidi, and her mom. Back then, such requests were rare. Still, everything lined up, and it seemed I was the only possible father. "No pregnancy terminations," I said. "Fine," she said. "But I want a ring. I want everyone to know I'm with the father of my child, and I want us married before the baby is born." "We'll marry the day the baby is born," I said. "That way we can do a blood test to be sure." So we married, and soon after, Dave was born. He went to daycare during the day so Heidi could pursue her modeling career. But it never took off. There was always something wrong, too small, too big, or not fitting the mold. I didn't care if she never made a dime from modeling. I just wanted her to be happy. I worked all day, dropped Dave at daycare, picked him up in the evening, and took care of him at night. I even cooked because Heidi spent her days running from one appointment to another, chasing her big break. "But Dad, didn't she make it eventually?" my daughter Sarah asked. "In her living room, in her old house. She has giant photos of herself from when she supposedly made the cover of Vogue and other magazines," I said. "Sarah, sweetheart, it wasn't real," I added. "Look closely at the cover. It doesn't say Vogue. It says vague. I created them to lift your mom's spirits." Near the end of her modeling career, I became worried about Heidi. Her ego was delicate and the industry was tough. Imagine going from one meeting to the next and constantly hearing, "You're not what we're looking for." I think Heidi eventually became disillusioned. She no longer approached meetings with the same energy as before. I believe this happened because times changed, and the bold, unique looks of the late 70s gave way to a more conservative style. I decided to surprise Heidi at the agency with flowers and invite her to lunch. I had just been promoted to team leader, which meant more income and respect. I wanted to celebrate by treating my girlfriend and son. Everything felt perfect. Heidi often mentioned Phil Jackson, a renowned photographer known for launching models' careers. She said he believed she had the potential to be a supermodel. When I arrived at the agency, the receptionist told me Heidi was in Phil's office working on her portfolio. Excited to see her at work, I walked in. But that excitement vanished when I saw Heidi on her knees in front of Phil. The scene felt surreal. She stood up and approached me, and I noticed she was completely without clothes. It was clear Phil intended to go further. I glanced around and grabbed 2 expensive-looking cameras. Phil raised his hand and said, "Please don't." I ignored him and threw the cameras to the floor with all my strength, then knocked over a shelf with about 8 more. I walked out, and Heidi ran after me, struggling to get dressed as people laughed at her while she followed me barefoot down the street. At the time, I drove an old '71 Mustang. I didn't care for the Mustangs of the late '70s or the concerns about the gas crisis or environment. I wanted power in my car, and with my good job, I could afford it. The environment had already been damaged by past generations, so I felt justified. When I got home, I put Dave to bed and called Heidi's mom to come pick her up. She arrived before Heidi made it back. I explained what happened, and she sat there shaking her head in disbelief. While we waited, she smoked nonstop, easily going through 2 packs. I remember her holding Dave and filling the room with smoke. It's surprising we made it through the 80s. When Heidi finally got home, I took Dave and went outside to give her and her mother space. Heidi kept pleading for me to talk, but her mother pulled her back and said, "He doesn't want to talk to you. You need to give him some time." She took Heidi home and the phone calls started. Over the next 24 hours, Heidi called hundreds of times. A few days later, I agreed to let her visit Dave for the weekend. I planned to go shopping and maybe play golf while she spent time with him. When she arrived and I was about to leave, she asked, "Where are you going?" "I'm heading out," I replied. She reminded me, "You usually take care of Dave. I don't know how to feed or change him." I sighed. "I was supposed to stay while you visit with him." Heidi kept apologizing and saying she missed me. She insisted, "Phil forced me to do it. I had no choice, or he wouldn't edit my photos." I grew angry, and she warned, "Don't make this difficult. It was just a test to help me become a top model." Years later, I discovered she had been dishonest. She pursued most of the photographers and booking agents trying to secure opportunities. But back then, I believed her. She seemed so genuine, and I was deeply in love with her. She even suggested giving up her career to become a housewife. What could I say? We grew close again, and I promised never to bring it up. The following years were good. I earned more money, and by the time Dave turned 5, Heidi was expecting again. Sasha was born into a loving family. Heidi cheated on me again with Dave's 3rd-grade teacher, and I forgave her. We had a few more good years, and Sarah was born. Later, I caught Heidi with our housemate, but I couldn't leave. My love for our 3 children was stronger than anything. I wanted to leave badly, but couldn't abandon them. I thought, once they're older, I'll be able to go. My feelings for Heidi had changed. She had hurt me too many times, and staying seemed easier than starting over. When Heidi's mother passed away, it seemed to settle her down. We had an unusual conversation after everyone left the funeral home, and only Heidi and I remained. Her mother was buried holding a cigarette. I half expected her to rise and help us with our issues. Heidi looked at me through the coffin and spoke. "James, I'm terrible," she said. "I spent my life waiting for something extraordinary to happen to prove I was special. I've cheated on you and our kids more times than you know. For every time you caught me, there were 5 or 6 you didn't. I don't know why I did it. You were always the best lover I ever had. I was a terrible mother and wife, but you stayed. Why? Because I loved you from the first moment I saw you." "Heidi," I responded, "I loved you too. From that moment in the back seat when you told my mom you loved me and wanted to marry me despite everything, I thought you were too good for me and tried to keep my distance to avoid ruining you. But fate brought us back together. And for the last 25 years, I've been trying to sabotage everything." A tear ran down her face, showing she meant it. "James, I will never cheat on you again. From now on, you're my only man. I promise," she said. I believed her. She won me over, and I didn't leave as I had planned. We had more good years. We made plans for me to retire early so we could travel the world together. We raised 3 amazing children and started taking short trips to discover new places, even though we were over 50 and had been together for more than 30 years. We acted like teenagers. It wasn't uncommon for people to catch us kissing passionately in my Mustang. We shared many adventures, and those were the best times of my life. 3 years ago, we decided to try skiing. When we arrived, we saw that all the kids were learning to snowboard instead. So we chose to learn snowboarding too. That marked the beginning of the end. "Mom started an affair with your ski instructor, didn't she?" Dave asked, frustrated. So much for her promise. Unbelievable. "Can I please finish the story? It's almost done," I said. Sam got up and sat on my lap, and I continued. "To answer your question, no, your mom didn't have an affair with the ski instructor or anyone else during that trip. In fact, that trip, until the very end, was one of the happiest memories of our marriage. Imagine spending the entire day with the person you've loved since you were old enough to know what love is. You wake up with her in your arms, share a few lingering kisses, give her a playful pat, and head to breakfast. You take a ski lesson together, the air is crisp and fresh, and every glance at her makes your heart warm. You have lunch, return to the room, and make passionate love until late afternoon. Then you prepare for one last run before dinner. I replay that day in my mind because it only happened like that on the final day. The rest of the trip was full of arguments. Your mom complained nonstop about the chalet being too warm, the outside being too cold, the sun being too bright, the night too dark, the hills too steep and long, and even the snow being too white. People were either insincere or too young. I think she was wrestling with the fact that she was nearing 60 and wasn't the sex symbol she once was. But that last day was perfect and made up for all the earlier arguments. We went for one final descent before dinner, and that's when it happened. Your mom wasn't a skilled skier, so she stuck with skis. As we made our way up the hill, we noticed a crew filming a commercial or something similar. Your mom went wild, rolling through the shot area, unnoticed at first. Lee, the director, was too focused on the models. So your mom, trying to show off despite her lack of skill, attempted tricks without paying attention and ended up sliding into an entrance for one of the pro tracks. The ski instructor didn't even work on those slopes. One moment she was posing in front of cameras that weren't focused on her, and the next, she was screaming as she crashed into a tree. It was terrifying. There was a loud, prolonged scream, followed by a heavy thud. The impact was so hard, the tree shook. The rescue team was afraid to move her and called an ambulance immediately. A medevac helicopter arrived and took her to the nearest hospital. Fortunately, we were in Michigan, surrounded by excellent medical facilities. Heidi regained consciousness 3 days later, which was a relief because she underwent 4 surgeries during that time. The first operation was to fix her broken nose, which put her out of immediate danger. The next day, they operated on her spine to address several slipped discs pressing on her spinal cord. Without this, she risked losing mobility or control over her limbs. This was the longest procedure, but the doctors were optimistic she would walk again after recovery. The following day, they inserted pins into her wrists, which she had broken trying to brace for impact. Despite numerous bruises covering her face and body, Heidi was otherwise okay. As I mentioned, Heidi woke up within 3 days, and thankfully her mind seemed sharp. In hindsight, I wish I had learned more from that experience. Sarah, do you remember when I fell down the stairs while we were putting up Christmas decorations? I asked. Yes, Dad, it was so scary, she replied. What did I say when I came to? I continued. You asked the paramedic about Mom and us, Sarah said. I stayed by your mother's side for 3 full days without leaving. Her first words when she woke up were, damn, then how do I look? I was so relieved she was awake that I overlooked the significance of that moment. It took me months to fully process everything. Heidi's hospital was 80 miles from home, and I drove there daily for 4 months straight. When she was ready to be discharged, the doctors recommended ongoing care that couldn't be done at home. They suggested a nursing home or intensive care facility, and there were several options nearby, including one just 10 miles from home. But Heidi insisted on going to a facility near East Lansing, nearly 90 miles away. I didn't understand why she chose that place. I assumed it was because Sarah was back at college, and maybe Heidi wanted to be closer to her. It could have been a backup plan for when I had to work since Sarah's boyfriend Justin worked nearby. I continued visiting daily and stayed until visiting hours ended. Heidi's stay was supposed to last a month, and while the first 3 weeks were uneventful, that was only because I was unaware of what was happening. I remember one day vividly. I arrived earlier than usual that morning. Traffic on 696 was lighter, so I sped up and my Mustang raced ahead. Normally I got there around 9 a.m., just after Heidi was wheeled out for her morning shower. Although she had regained the ability to walk, she was still unsteady, so she was moved in a wheelchair for safety. The staff probably wanted to avoid any falls before her release. After her shower, she would typically have breakfast and undergo some tests before visiting hours began. Arriving at 8 a.m. was earlier than usual, so my visit was unexpected. Heidi wasn't even in the room when the staff let me in. I decided to surprise her, but ended up being surprised myself. I hid in the small bathroom in Heidi's room. This was one of the happiest times in our marriage. We were closer than ever, even while she was hospitalized. We made plans for our future and dreamt of places to visit. For the first time, I felt sure that Heidi loved me as much as I loved her. It took until we were 50, but I felt like I had won. After almost 40 years, I finally felt like I had the woman of my dreams. I tried to stifle my laughter when a man wheeled her chair into the room and helped her back into bed. However, instead of leaving, he closed the door, as though it was something he did regularly. He walked back over to Heidi's bed just as I was about to step out and surprise her. Then, they began to be intimate, trying to keep quiet so the nurses wouldn't hear them. I considered slipping out of the bathroom while they were distracted, but I was too stunned. In that moment, lost in my thoughts, I came to the painful realization that your mother would never be the woman I hoped she could be. My kids were grown, so I no longer had a reason to tolerate it. The man took Heidi back to the shower so she could clean up again, and I simply left. I drove home, ignoring Heidi's calls that started almost as soon as I left the building. To me, the marriage was over. That same day, I reached out to my lawyer to start the divorce process. I withdrew most of the money from our accounts, leaving her only a couple of $1,000s. I arranged for a quick sale of the house with a realtor. Property values were high in our area, and a broker offered $411,000 for the house, which I accepted. I rented a large condo, a truck, and a trailer. I packed up my belongings and loaded my Mustang onto the trailer. I changed my phone number and left. I wrote 3 letters to each of you and included them with the divorce papers. Since you were all spread out, I knew you'd reach out after receiving the letters. I included my lawyer's contact details and emails and asked him to share my new number with you when requested. This way, Heidi couldn't contact me, but you all could. I never expected her to take money from her kids or withhold the letters I wrote. Each day, I drove as far as I could, pausing in different states to get a sense of the people and places. I think I was so frustrated that I kept driving until I reached the end of the road. I chose to settle in Florida. Florida had a strong Michigan snowbird community, and even the Tigers held spring training there. I kept to myself and stayed inactive for the first year. Realizing Heidi wasn't going to agree to the divorce, I filed for it in Florida. I also launched a small property management business, helping homeowners who lived elsewhere for most of the year with tasks like lawn care or storm preparation. After my first year, I started visiting bars and clubs. I wasn't ready to date, but there were plenty of women my age showing interest. I met a few women similar to Heidi, which turned my stomach. Most women my age were a bit heavier, and I realized I was done with the economy class experience. No more women with flat figures for me. That's why I was at the clubs. I was taking stock of the type of women out there. That's how I met Sam, but that's another story. James, you were never supposed to find out, Heidi sobbed. It was just, you breaking another promise and proving how little I mean to you. Heidi, I said. I called you repeatedly that day because I thought something had happened to you. Something happened to me? I said. I'm tired of how you treated me. But James, it meant nothing, Heidi pleaded. Don't you see that after all this time, you're the only man I've ever truly loved? If this is your version of love, then I don't want it, I said. For the first time, I have someone who genuinely loves me. I'm better off without you, Heidi. And now I have my children back and another baby on the way. I suspected something happened that day, Heidi admitted. The nurse told me she saw you go upstairs. Justin turned pale. What does Justin have to do with this, Dad? Sarah asked. He was the one in the room with your mom, I said. Chaos erupted. Sarah lunged at Justin, who tried to get up and run. David grabbed him and punched him. I tripped Justin and he fell right in front of Sarah. He managed to break free and fled the house. Kelly and I comforted Sarah for about an hour while everyone else talked downstairs. After Kelly gave Sarah a couple of sleeping pills, she fell asleep. She's seeing a lawyer tomorrow to file for divorce, Kelly said as she returned to the others. We sat in uncomfortable silence until Heidi spoke. James, I've thought a lot over the past 3 years you've been gone. Tomorrow I'm going to the hospital to see what's wrong with me. I wish you could help me through this. Mom, are you serious? David asked. She's definitely not herself, Sasha added. I want my money now. Write me a check so I can cut you out of my life, or I'll have you arrested before you even get to the hospital. Heidi, you're my husband's mother, Kelly said. But you took advantage of our kindness. We put our lives on hold when you had more than enough to take care of yourself. We accepted you. And no, Kelly, I said. She used you. Heidi only appears when she needs something. She's always been that way. You realized it much sooner than I did. At least we're all together now. You can call me anytime. Why don't you all come to Florida for Christmas? I checked my watch and knew it was time to leave. We'll be there, Dad, David said. Come on, Mom, I'll help you get ready. James, you can't be serious. How can you leave with this girl when I need you? Because she loves him and is loyal to him, Grandma, Sam said firmly. I handed Sam her coat, and she started putting it on. She leaned over and kissed me. James, you won't leave me, Heidi yelled. It'll haunt you. You've always forgiven me, and this time you're still mine. No, Sam said, stepping between us. He's mine now. Have a great day, Sam added. To hell with you, Heidi muttered angrily. We made it to the airport with 20 minutes to spare. The little V6 convertible navigated through the snow, and we arrived in one piece, flying back to Florida. David, Kelly, Sarah, and Sasha came to Florida for Christmas. They had a great time and pampered Sam, whose belly was already noticeably round. Sarah stayed, working on rebuilding her life after divorcing Justin. Heidi called them almost daily, but none of them answered. Eventually, she stopped calling altogether. A few weeks later, my lawyer called me for a meeting. Heidi and I had prepared wills before I left, and she never updated hers. Heidi passed away in the hospital, alone. Even on her final day, doctors were still trying to diagnose the mysterious illness that affected her. They suspected it might be similar to the condition that took her mother's life at the same age. I split the money equally among my children. The last task was burying Heidi on a rainy day. Most of the attendees left quickly. Surprisingly, Justin was there, likely trying to make amends with Sarah. As the rain intensified, The priest told me we needed to finish because of the weather. I said we would each toss a handful of dirt on the coffin and leave. We all gathered at David and Kelly's house afterward. I think I came out at just the right time to meet the woman who would bring me happiness for the rest of my life. For me, that made everything feel perfect.